Hey everyone. Tonight we're stepping into the harsh and unforgiving world of Roman slavery, a life far from the marble villas and grand togas you might imagine. Being a Roman slave wasn't just hard, it was a brutal existence where freedom was a distant dream. And every day was filled with back-breaking labor just to survive. Beneath the stories of gladiators and emperors lies the reality of millions trapped in chains, serving others with no rights and little hope. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights and let the soft glow of your screen pull you deeper into this ancient world. Maybe let a gentle, steady hum fill the background. Close your eyes slowly and let the noise of today slip away. You're about to walk the dusty roads of Rome, where the weight of chains, the fear of punishment, and the loss of freedom shape every moment of a slave's life. You've just lost the worst game of hide-and-seek in ancient history. One moment, you're clutching a rusted spear in a crumbling hill fort somewhere in Gaul, shouting brave things you don't quite believe. The next, you're on your knees in the mud with Roman steel at your throat, your village on fire behind you, and a centurion deciding whether you're worth more alive or dead. Spoiler: alive. Barely. Because congratulations, you're not a soldier anymore. You're cargo. The shackles go on fast. No name, no rights, no more you. Now, you're property. One of thousands taken in a single campaign, rounded up like cattle. Some cry, some pray, some just stare at the ground. Doesn't matter. You're all going the same way. Welcome to the ancient supply chain. It begins with war and ends on a dock that smells like old fish and regret. You're marched for days, weeks maybe. You lose count somewhere between the hunger cramps and the blisters. The guards don't speak your language. Not that they need to. The point of a boot in your ribs is pretty universal. Along the way, you see others like you. Thousands of them. Captured soldiers, children, elderly folk, entire families with everything taken except their fear. A few drop dead in the dust. No one stops walking. Eventually, you see the sea. You wish you hadn't. Because the ships don't look like salvation. They look like splinters waiting to happen. Great wooden bellies lined with chains, reeking of sweat and vomit, crammed with more flesh than timber. You're shoved on board and chained in place. If you're lucky, you can lie down. If you're unlucky, someone else dies in their spot and you get promoted. The voyage? Don't ask. Just know that you'll never smell the same again. Salt, bile, piss, and despair, mixed with the sound of waves slapping the hull and men crying in the dark. One day blurs into another. Someone tries to jump overboard. The Romans fish him back out, then make an example of him. Loudly. When land appears, it's not relief, it's reality. Because land means the next stage of your value assessment. The market. You dock at Delos, or maybe Ostia, or somewhere else that sells humans by the boatload. Wherever it is, the air is hot, the sun is cruel, and the shouts of traders bounce off marble walls like angry birds. You're unchained, but not free. Herded into a pen, washed off like livestock, and oiled until you shine. They smear ash in your hair to make you look younger, or fatter, or healthier. Truth doesn't matter, only the illusion of value. Then comes the worst part: inspection. You stand naked on a platform, squinting through the sun as strangers grab your arms, check your teeth, squeeze your thighs like they're shopping for olives. They speak Latin. You don't understand most of it, but you catch a few words: strong, quiet, fertile, defiant, dangerous. The last one costs extra. A placard hangs from your neck. It says your name, except it doesn't. It's the name someone gave you. Maybe a number, maybe a job title you haven't learned yet. You're not a person. You're a product description. Some buyers are polite. Most aren't. One merchant flicks your ear and laughs when you flinch. Another pinches your ribs and frowns. You try to stay still. You try not to cry. It doesn't help either way. If you're lucky, you're sold quickly. If not, you spend days in the pen, sleeping on stone, watching others disappear one by one. Some never come back. Others do, bloody and broken. Turns out the buyer changed their mind. Or the slave tried to run. Neither ends well. When your moment comes, it's almost a relief. A senator's steward likes the look of you, says something about needing strong backs for the kitchen, or maybe the fields. You don't really catch it. You just nod. He haggles over you like a sack of onions. A handshake later, you're officially his problem. Someone hands over a few coins. You're chained again. This time, with a tag on your wrist and a new name barked into your ear. You don't get to say goodbye to the others, but one glances at you as you're led away. You don't know them. Doesn't matter. There's a flicker of understanding in their eyes. You're both ghosts now. Your feet hit the cobbled road. Roman boots march behind you. Somewhere ahead, there's a villa, or a shop, or a farm, maybe a brothel. You don't know where you're going, but you do know one thing. This is just the beginning. It hits you the moment you arrive. The smell. Not just one smell, but a layered, suffocating fog of humanity and heat. Sweat, oil, dust, the iron tang of blood somewhere just out of sight. And beneath it all, something sour and rotting, like old meat left in the sun. You gag quietly. The guard beside you grunts. "You'll get used to it," he says. You won't. Welcome to the Roman slave market, where men are currency, women are investments, and children are sold with fewer questions than goats. The market is a roaring animal. Voices shout over one another in Greek, Latin, Punic, Aramaic, each dialect vying for attention. Merchants bark out prices, buyers haggle, slaves whimper. Laughter rises in sharp bursts, always at someone else's expense. You're shoved forward, not alone. Dozens, no hundreds, are herded through gates like cattle. Rows of naked backs ahead of you shimmer with oil. That's on purpose. It hides bruises, makes the muscles pop, gives the illusion of health. One woman beside you still has a lash mark across her ribs. They just smeared olive oil over it and hoped no one would notice. The stalls are organized, sort of. On the left, educated Greeks, tutors, scribes, secretaries. They're posed like statues, heads held high, eyes empty. You can almost taste their pride, drained drop by drop until nothing is left but grammar and obedience. On the right, laborers, big ones, shoulders like oxen, eyes downcast. One boy can't be more than 16, but his arms are thicker than your thighs. A man pokes at his biceps like he's inspecting a wine barrel. And then there's the worst stall of all. In the middle, the pretty ones. Boys and girls with wide eyes and trembling hands. No oil here, just perfume. Cheap, sticky stuff that clings to their skin. The buyers linger longer at this table. Their smiles don't reach their eyes. You look away before you vomit. Someone grabs your arm, spins you around. It's a merchant. Skin like leather. Rings on every finger. He yells something you don't understand, then gestures to your shoulders. He nods approvingly, calls out your price to the crowd. You don't even know what he says. Could have been 20 denarii. Could have been a handful of grapes. Either way, it's too cheap. A chalkboard is hung around your neck. Your description. Except you didn't write it. Someone else decided who you are now. Strong, quiet, no known illnesses. You want to scream that you're more than that. That you had a name, a family, dreams. But what's the point? Here, you're a product, not a person. You're led to a platform, raised up above the crowd, a stage for meat. Below, the buyers shuffle closer, shading their eyes from the sun. One spits on the ground and grunts. Another laughs and throws a fig pit at your foot. The merchant begins the show. He spins you around, lifts your arms, slaps your back lightly to show sturdiness, opens your mouth like you're a horse. Someone in the crowd yells, "What about his teeth?" The merchant flashes a grin and shouts back, "Better than yours, Publius." Laughter. Always laughter. You're told to walk, then jog, then squat, then jump. You do all of it. What choice do you have? From the platform, you see others being sold. One girl is bought by a woman with a sharp nose and a sharp tongue. She slaps the girl across the face before leading her away by the wrist. Another man is bought by a senator's steward. He doesn't speak, just nods and hands over a purse heavy with coins. You're not sold today. Not yet. Back to the pen. The pen is worse than the platform. At least there you had space. Here you sleep shoulder to shoulder on cracked stone. The water is brackish. The food is moldy bread and half-rotted onions. Sometimes one of you disappears in the night, sold privately, or worse. But you listen. You learn the system. Who gets picked first? Who gets sent to the mines? Who ends up in the arena? You learn that being too quiet makes you forgettable. Too loud, and you're labeled difficult. It's a game, one where the stakes are your life. A week passes, maybe two. It's hard to tell. Then it happens. Your number is called. Not your name, because that's gone. Just a number, barked by a tired guard with a whip tucked into his belt. You're cleaned again, oiled again, displayed again. But this time, someone points. A tall Roman in a red-dyed toga. Wealthy, clearly. He walks with a swagger that says, "I own half this street." His fingers are stained with ink. A scribe, maybe, or a clerk. Important, anyway. He circles you. Doesn't say much. Just grunts. Taps your chest once. Then nods. The merchant claps. A deal is made. You're handed over like a package. That's it. Your sale is done. A human life is exchanged in under 2 minutes. You want to feel something. Rage, fear, sorrow. But mostly, you feel numb. You are led through the market gates, past the screaming crowds, the open stalls, the dogs fighting over scraps, past the oil-soaked bodies still waiting for their turn. And just like that, you're gone from their world. You're someone else's problem now. You would think the sale was the worst part. Being paraded like livestock, prodded, measured, bought with a nod. It was humiliating, yes, but the real shift, the true unraveling of who you were, comes after the deal is done. After the coin has changed hands and you're no longer even pretending to be a person. Because now, you have to be processed. The villa is quiet when you arrive. Too quiet. The kind of silence where wealth hums just beneath the marble. You think for a moment that maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe the master is kind. Maybe he just wants a houseboy or someone to walk his dog. Then the steward meets you at the gates. He's an older man, hollow-cheeked with a scar down his jaw that he doesn't explain. He doesn't yell. He doesn't smile either. He just looks at you like he's seen your kind 1,000 times before. You're not new. You're not interesting. You're inventory. He takes your hand, not to shake it. He flips your wrist over, studies your forearm, nods. This one's clean. You're taken to the outbuilding behind the main house, a squat stone structure that smells of iron, ash, and sweat. Inside, there are others, silent, sitting, waiting. Some are naked from the waist up. Others already bear the mark. It's not a metaphor. In Rome, they brand you. They don't whisper your name. They don't ask about your old life. They burn a new identity into your skin. One that can't be washed away, not by soap, not by time. You're made to kneel. They talk as if you're not there. This one's going to the villa in Tibur. Put the master's sigil. Same as the others. You want to ask what they mean, but you already know. You saw it on another slave's neck, an angry, raised scar in the shape of a house crest. Not a letter, not a number, a symbol. Ownership branded like cattle. The iron rod lies in the brazier, glowing red. It looks small, almost harmless. But when it comes near your skin, every hair on your body screams. They don't ask permission. They don't count down. The steward just presses it to your flesh like he's stamping wax. The pain doesn't even register at first. Just a shock. Then fire. Then shaking. Your knees give out. And you fall, head hitting the ground. The others don't look. They've either been through it or they know it's coming. You're lucky, they say. Some masters brand the face, the forehead, or worse, FVG for fugitivus. Run away. That brand never fades, and it follows you for life. If you try to flee, even once, you're labeled forever. The branding isn't the end. Now comes the collar. You're not a prisoner, not officially. But the ring of iron they fasten around your neck might as well be a shackle. It's not thick, just enough to be seen, just enough to remind you and everyone else of what you are. Some collars are engraved, property of Gaius Valerius, or, if found, return to House Flavius, as if you're a dog, a possession, a missing object someone might be kind enough to send back. Yours has a tag. It clinks softly when you move. You'll learn to walk without making it jingle. You'll try to forget the weight of it. You won't. There's paperwork, too. A ledger is opened, your details written down in neat, bored handwriting. Age, height, place of purchase, branding location. Any scars noted, any identifying marks. They give you a slave number, a set of digits that tie you to a receipt. You are now a line item. You're told your duties next. Not by the master. He doesn't speak to you. The steward does the talking. You'll serve in the household, tend to the bathhouse, carry trays during feasts, maybe more, depending depends on how obedient you are. You're also told the rules. No speaking unless spoken to. No eye contact with the domina unless she commands it. No stealing. No running. No talking back. Punishments vary. Whipping, mostly. Sometimes worse. You don't ask what worse means. Later, when you're alone in the sleeping quarters, you touch the brand. It's raw, blistered, but permanent. You look around the room. The others stare at the floor, at the walls, at nothing at all. Some have been here for years. Some are new, like you. No one speaks unless they trust you. It takes time to earn that trust. It can be broken in seconds. One old man whispers after lights out, "Don't forget who you were." They'll try to burn it out of you, but don't forget. You want to believe him, but it's hard. You wash the next morning in cold water. The collar clinks. The brand stings. And when you catch your reflection in a bronze basin, you almost don't recognize the person looking back. You used to have a name. Now you have a tag. It begins before dawn. Not because anyone wakes you, but because the others are already moving. Quietly, quickly, like mice in the dark. You blink in the half-light, your brand still throbbing beneath the linen of your tunic, and realize that no one told you what time to wake up. That was your first mistake. Your second is standing still for too long. A kitchen slave hisses at you as she darts past with a clay jug balanced expertly in one hand. Move. If they catch you idle, they'll whip me too. You scramble after her, not sure where you're going, only knowing that you mustn't be seen doing nothing. This is your first day inside the domus, the Roman household, and here, everything has its place. Except you. Not yet. You're led to the atrium, the grand central hall, where light filters down through the compluvium in the ceiling and collects in a small pool at the center. The floors are mosaic, chilled from the night. The walls are painted with fading gods and mythical beasts, though you hardly have time to admire them. The steward, the same one who supervised your branding, waits with a wax tablet in hand. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. One flick of his finger, and 3 slaves rush forward to receive instructions. When he looks at you, his gaze sharpens. New one. You'll scrub the peristelium this morning. Help in the triclinium at midday. And if you spill wine again, you'll spend the night in chains. You open your mouth to speak, to ask what any of that means. But another slave nudges you sharply. Don't talk, just nod. You do. You don't yet know where the peristelium is, or what a triclinium looks like. You barely speak the language, only enough to understand when someone's angry, which, in this place, is often. You are not the only foreigner here. Some slaves are from Gaul, others from Syria, some from beyond the Danube. Everyone speaks in fragments, a kind of cobbled-together Latin, stripped of grammar, heavy with hand gestures. You learn fast. You learn that celerator means quickly, and that taste means shut your mouth. You learn the word for bucket, for sponge, for bread. You learn that your name isn't important. The steward just calls you boy, even when you're not one. When you speak incorrectly, others correct you with narrowed eyes. But when you speak well, they watch more closely. It's not always safe to be clever. No one tells you the rules of the house, but you learn those quickly too. At the top is the dominus, the master. He doesn't speak to you. Not yet. He walks like he owns the floor, and in a way, he does. Every tile, every column, every breathing person in it. You hear him laugh sometimes in the triclinium during meals, and you learn to tell by the tone whether it's safe to enter. Then there's the domina, his wife. She might be more dangerous. She watches everything, and she remembers faces. If she likes you, she might let you serve her bath. If she doesn't, she might have you sent to the farm. After them come the freedmen, once slaves, now free, but still tied to the household. They're more feared than the masters because they know how the system works. They climb by stepping over others. One of them, Felix, oversees the storeroom. You learn quickly. Don't touch his wine jugs. Don't breathe too loud near the ledger. And if he asks you to take the blame for something he did, say yes. Then, finally, there are the slaves like you. But even here, there's a pecking order. Kitchen slaves are lowest. Their hands always smell of onions and smoke. Wet nurses, though, have strange power. The household depends on them. Body slaves, the ones who dress the master, who hold his chamber pot, are both envied and pitied. You're none of these yet. You're a floater. You're given whatever job no one else wants. Scrubbing bird droppings from the statues in the garden, chasing stray dogs from the latrines, holding the curtain aside as guests arrive, then disappearing before anyone notices your face. You eat what's left, if there's anything. A crust of barley bread, a few olives, some stale cheese, if the master hasn't thrown it to the dogs instead. You eat standing, always quickly, always listening for footsteps. At night, you sleep on a mat near the laundry. No blanket, just the sound of dripping water and the low moans of another slave with a lash wound on his back. You keep your eyes open longer than you should, trying to memorize the house, the hallways, the stairwells, where the garden ends and the stables begin. You tell yourself it's just to feel more at home, but really, you're thinking about running. Everyone does, at first. Then they remember the branding. On the third day, the kitchen girl who once snapped at you hands you a heel of bread when no one's looking. On the fourth, the old Greek slave who cleans the oil lamps nods at you in quiet approval after you sweep the portico without being asked. You're still nothing, but maybe you're something enough to last. And lasting, that's the goal now. You've stopped waiting for someone to ask your story. No one cares that you once walked free, that you once had a mother, or dreams, or land. Here, in the domus, all that matters is your function. You belong to the house. You are part of its silence, its walls, its machinery. Your job is to know your place. And never forget it. You see, the fate of a Roman slave could differ vastly depending on one factor alone, where they were sent after they were sold. For some, life would unfold behind the heavy wooden doors of a townhouse in the heart of Rome, surrounded by marble floors, painted walls, and the daily rituals of a wealthy Roman family. For others, life would be dictated by the seasons and the soil, spent laboring in the open fields of a sprawling agricultural estate known as a latifundium. Though both belonged to the same class, slaves, their lives would play out in profoundly different ways. Urban and rural slavery in the Roman Empire were two sides of the same coin, but each bore its own burdens, its own rhythms, and its own quiet horrors. In the city, slaves worked inside the domus, the urban household of the elite. Here, slavery took the form of constant service, polished, practiced, and highly visible. A city slave might spend the day preparing meals in the kitchen, fetching water, tending to the lamps, cleaning the mosaics, or standing quietly in the background while guests were entertained. The work was long, and mistakes could still bring punishment. But these slaves lived close to the symbols of luxury and culture. They could overhear poetry recitations, observe political discussions, and sometimes even learn to read or write if their masters saw fit. They lived in close quarters with other slaves, some in the atrium, others tucked away in storerooms or beneath stairwells. And in this shared closeness, small hierarchies would develop. A trusted slave might supervise others. A particularly skilled one, like a scribe or a tutor, might enjoy privileges unknown to those who simply swept floors. In contrast, rural slavery was marked by physical suffering and invisibility. Slaves on latifundia, vast country estates used for agriculture, endured backbreaking labor under the open sky. They rose before dawn and worked until nightfall, plowing fields, harvesting grain, picking olives, and tending livestock. These slaves were viewed less as human helpers and more as tools, necessary for production, but expendable when worn out. Unlike their urban counterparts, who could hope for some form of upward mobility, or at least proximity to the master's favor, rural slaves were managed by overseers, often with brutal efficiency. They lived in communal barracks, ate plain food, and rarely interacted with their masters directly. Their days were dictated by the cycle of the seasons and the crack of the overseer's whip. There were subtle differences in the kinds of relationships that could form in each environment. In the city, slaves had opportunities to develop complex social ties with one another. Alliances, rivalries, even underground economies of favors and secrets. In some cases, a loyal or particularly clever slave could earn a small allowance or even manumission, formal freedom later in life. A freed slave, or libertus, might become a client of his former master, living a life of partial independence while still bound by obligation. These stories were rare, but they existed, and in the streets of Rome, they gave some slaves a faint sense of hope. On the farms, however, manumission was more fantasy than possibility. Most rural slaves died as they had lived, buried in unmarked graves, far from the city walls, remembered by no one. Their suffering was largely invisible to the rest of Roman society. There were no guests to impress, no masters listening in the corridor, no chance to overhear a philosophical debate or catch the eye of someone influential. There was only the land, the labor, and the knowledge that if one of them collapsed from exhaustion, another would simply take their place. Still, both kinds of slaves were bound by the same chains, legal, physical, and psychological. They had no rights of their own. Their names were often given to them by their masters. They could be punished without trial, sold without notice, or separated from loved ones at a whim. Even the most trusted household slave was always, at the core, property. And property could be replaced. City slaves might eat better, sleep under a roof, and live among the trappings of Roman civilization, but they were constantly under scrutiny. Their actions were watched, their tone was noted, and their every gesture could be judged as either service or insolence. Rural slaves lived with less oversight in the moment, but greater cruelty in the long term. The absence of the master's watchful eye meant that overseers could act with near total impunity, and violence was often the first and last tool of discipline. In both lives, there was work without end, but in the city, it was wrapped in formality, bowed heads, clean tunics, ceremonial duties at family banquets. In the countryside, it was stripped down to its most brutal essentials: planting, cutting, carrying, bleeding. There was no facade, no illusion of grace or privilege. There was only survival. Though Roman law made no clear distinction between urban and rural slaves, the lived experience could not have been more different. One might overhear Virgil, while another never heard anything but the wind over wheat. One might serve in silence at a senator's table, while the other cried out in pain beneath the olive trees. Yet both were caught in the same system, one that turned human beings into instruments of labor, denied them identity, and called it civilization. By the time the evening fire burned low in the villa or the countryside went dark beneath the stars, both slaves would lie down in their place, one in a shadowed corner of a marble hallway, the other in a wooden shack full of groaning bodies and splintered beds. They might dream of home if they still remembered it, or they might not dream at all. For a slave in Rome, whether in silk-lined halls or muddy fields, sleep was not rest, it was an intermission. And in the morning, the work would begin again. In a Roman domus, a wealthy household tucked behind thick stone walls and shaded courtyards, the first sounds of the day were not roosters or bells, but the quiet rustle of slaves beginning to move in the dark. Long before the sun crept over the tiled rooftops, a domestic slave was already awake. Perhaps he had slept in a storeroom beside a pile of folded linens, or on a mat tucked in the corner near the kitchen hearth. The bed was simple, the blanket coarse, and the air still heavy with the ashes of last night's fire. But there was no time to linger. The day's work began before the city even stirred. The first task was usually water. Carrying heavy clay jugs, the slave would make his way to the nearest fountain or cistern, his bare feet slapping the stone pavement in the early gloom. The water had to be fetched for washing, cooking, and cleaning. Some homes had private supplies, but many still relied on public sources, and this meant standing in line with others, waiting in silence. The jugs were heavy when full, balanced on shoulders or held in both arms, and the walk back was careful, steady. A spill meant more than wasted effort. It meant punishment. Back at the house, the real work began. Fires needed lighting. Bread, if not already prepared, had to be baked or bought. Floors were swept with brooms of straw. Lamps were trimmed, oil refilled. Furniture was dusted. Everything had to be clean and quiet before the master and his family rose for the day. A good slave left no trace of himself, only the illusion that the house maintained itself. If the household was wealthy, there might be many slaves, each with a role. One might tend to the master's clothing, cleaning his tunic, polishing his sandals, laying everything out just so. Another might prepare the bath, heating water, and scenting it with herbs. There could be a slave to brush the mistress's hair, another to dress her, and still others to tend to the children. In more modest homes, One slave did all this and more, rushing from task to task with practiced silence. After the family woke, the household grew louder. Orders were given. Meals were served. A slave might carry a tray to the triclinium, the dining room where the family reclined and conversed. He had to know who liked honey in their wine, who disliked figs, who wanted their bread toasted. Mistakes, even small ones, were remembered. Spilled drinks, overcooked meat, poorly timed service. These could mean a beating or worse. A slave was always visible, but never allowed to truly be seen. After breakfast, there were errands. A slave might be sent to the market, clutching a list and a few coins. He had to remember the orders exactly, negotiate with vendors, and return quickly. Others stayed behind, cleaning dishes, folding laundry, scrubbing floors, dusting statues, or watering the plants in the peristyle garden. On feast days or religious occasions, the work doubled. Food to prepare, guests to welcome, decorations to arrange. The afternoon offered little rest, perhaps a short moment to eat. Something simple, like a bit of barley bread or a handful of olives. Slaves ate quickly and apart from the family, usually in the kitchen or servants' area. Then the work continued. There were children to entertain or tutor, robes to mend, scrolls to organize, and sometimes messages to deliver across the city. A trusted slave might serve as a scribe or secretary, helping with correspondence or managing household accounts. These roles were more respected, but no less demanding. By evening, the household quieted again. The family dined once more, and slaves served as they had in the morning, carefully, quickly, invisibly. Afterwards, lamps were lit, beds were turned down, the floors were swept again. If the master had guests, the evening stretched late into the night, and the slaves remained on their feet until the final cup was emptied and the last sandal removed. Only then, when the air grew cooler and the household began to sleep, could a slave retreat to his corner, tired, silent, and often sore. There were no good nights or soft beds, just a mat, a wall, and perhaps the soft hum of the city beyond the courtyard gate. Tomorrow would come just as early, and with it, another day exactly like the one before. And yet, within this routine, a slave found small moments of life. A whispered joke shared in the kitchen, a plum tucked away from the market, a kind word from another slave, or a rare look of approval from a master. These were small things, but they mattered, because in a life where every hour belonged to someone else, even a single moment of one's own could feel like treasure. So the slave closed his eyes, not in peace, but in resignation. The domus grew still. The lamps flickered, and somewhere in the dark, the first breath of the next day was already beginning. In the depths of the Roman domus, beyond the grand atriums and the mosaic-tiled courtyards, behind the laughter of the master's family and the echoes of sandal-clad feet on marble, lay the kulina, the kitchen. It was not a place of culinary celebration or refined artistry, not in the way one might imagine today. The Roman kitchen was a smoky, cramped, windowless chamber, where heat pressed in from every direction and ash settled like dust on everything. And at its center, always moving, always sweating, were the slaves who made the household run, especially the kokous, the cook. To be a culinary slave in ancient Rome was to live a life of contradictions. On the one hand, it was a position of trust and importance. Food was central to Roman identity, and a well-prepared feast reflected honorably on the house. A talented cook was a prized possession, worth a fortune if they could master sauces and seasonings to the master's taste. Some were even known by name, their skills admired in whispers between noble guests. On the other hand, failure in the kitchen could mean humiliation, or worse. A dish too salty, a fish undercooked, bread burned just once too often, and the wooden spoon became more than a tool. It became a weapon of discipline. The day for a kitchen slave began long before the household stirred. Fires had to be rekindled from yesterday's embers, or lit anew with flint and dried reed. There were no modern stoves, just clay ovens, open flames, and bronze cauldrons suspended over glowing coals. The room filled quickly with smoke, thick and sharp in the lungs. Eyes watered constantly. Forearms bore small burns, souvenirs from oil that spat and popped in shallow pans. Blisters were common. No one complained. The ingredients arrived early, carried in from the market by another slave, or, if the house was grand, delivered directly. They came wrapped in leaves in rough baskets or in the folds of linen sacks. Meat bled. Fish stared with glassy eyes. Herbs wilted fast in the heat. A culinary slave worked quickly, cleaning, chopping, grinding. The mortarium, a heavy mortar and pestle, was in constant use. Garlic, coriander, cumin, pepper, all crushed to fine pastes or powders. Oil and vinegar were mixed with fermented fish sauce, garum, to create the strange, savory profile Roman diners loved. No precise recipes existed. Success depended on the memory of the slave and the preferences of the master. When guests were expected, the pressure doubled. A feast might stretch across 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last. Oysters with honeyed wine, dormice stuffed with minced pork and herbs, flaming peacocks redressed in their own feathers. The cook managed not only the food, but also the tempo, the sequencing, and the silence. Slaves did not shout in the kitchen. They whispered, pointed, gestured. One mistake could spoil the whole meal, and with it, the mood of powerful men. But the kitchen was not only a place of labor. It was also where the slaves found fleeting freedom. It was, in its own way, a place of community. Between tasks, whispers passed among them. Gossip about the master's affairs. Quiet complaints about a spoiled child or a broken amphora. A stolen fig, a smirk, a moment of laughter before returning to the heat. Sometimes the cook might sneak scraps to a younger slave. A slice of roasted carrot, a smear of fig paste on bread. It wasn't much, but it was something human in an inhuman world. And yet the threat of punishment was never far. Kitchens could be dangerous. Knives slipped, pots shattered, fires flared. If an accident delayed the meal or changed its flavor, the cook might be dragged out and flogged. If poison was suspected in the food, an ever-present fear in the elite circles of Rome, the slave could be tortured for answers. Trust could evaporate in a moment. Some kitchens even had chains in the corner, not for securing tools, for securing people. Still, some culinary slaves rose in station. If they pleased their master long enough, they might be moved from the smoky kitchen to manage the larder or supervise other slaves. A few were freed in old age, given a small pension and a room at the edge of the estate. But for most, the kitchen was a lifetime sentence. No relief from the smoke, no break from the heat, no applause for a perfect dish, only silence if it was good, and anger if it wasn't. When the feast ended and the guests had gone, the kitchen remained busy. Plates were scraped and scrubbed, leftovers sorted, bones discarded or boiled for stock, pots scoured with sand, Fires banked. Then, finally, the culinary slaves could rest, usually on a rough mat in the corner of the same smoky room, their skin still smelling of ash and pepper, their hands stained red from wine and beetroot. They fell asleep not to silence, but to the quiet sounds of other slaves cleaning nearby, the soft clink of clay against stone, the low breath of dying coals, the slow stretch of aching limbs. And in the morning, they would rise again, to start the fire, to slice the bread, to begin once more the invisible labor that kept the master's house alive. For in ancient Rome, a kitchen was never just a kitchen. It was a theater of survival, a crucible of discipline, and a place where the hands of the forgotten shaped the pleasures of the powerful, one smoky, salted dish at a time. You probably think of slavery as chains, mud, and hard labor, and you wouldn't be wrong. But in the sprawling world of Rome, not all slaves hauled stones or swept streets. Some wore the quiet cloak of intellect, slipping through the shadows as tutors, clerks, and secretaries. And surprisingly, many of these were Greek. Yes, Greek. Rome had conquered Greece centuries ago, but the empire couldn't erase Greek culture or smarts. If anything, the Romans admired it, especially when it came to education, philosophy, and numbers. So, what happened? They enslaved a lot of Greeks who were educated, polished, and trained to serve as tutors to Roman children, accountants to wealthy merchants, and scribes in the sprawling bureaucracies. You, if you had the misfortune to be one of these educated Greeks, might have a very different fate from your rough-hewn compatriots hauling timber or working in mines. You're a slave, yes, but you are also invaluable. Your mind, your knowledge, your skill with language and numbers make you an asset worth protecting. A strange sort of paradox. A man owned but also respected, used as a tool to sharpen the minds of the empire's elite. Picture this. You're a Greek slave named Demetrios, freshly dragged from your family home in Athens after Rome's legions swept through your city. Your first days in Rome were terrifying. Chains, harsh words, brutal labor. But then, suddenly, you are separated from the rougher slaves. A patrician's wife notices your ability to read, to speak Latin with a hint of Greek charm, and she hands you over to a tutor. Not a tutor for yourself, but to be the tutor. You find yourself in the grand villa of Senator Gaius Octavius, a man who's more concerned about his son's future than the state of his olive trees. His son, a boy of 10, stares at you suspiciously. You have to teach him Latin, Greek, math, and philosophy, all while being careful not to offend the boy's ego or his temper. You wake early, pores prickling with anxiety. The boy can be cruel. One wrong word, one misplaced lesson, and you might find yourself back in chains, back to the kitchens, or worse. But you also have power. You hold knowledge. And knowledge is currency, even for slaves. You sit with the boy, running your fingers over dusty scrolls, reciting Homer and Pythagoras, and trying to make algebra sound like a game. The boy is impatient, but smart. You watch him gradually grasp concepts, hear his laughter when a joke slips into a lesson, and feel something odd. A flicker of respect. Meanwhile, there's your other role, the clerk. You find yourself hunched over papyrus, dusting off your fingers as you meticulously tally ledgers for a wealthy merchant. You know the prices of grain, olive oil, and wine, better than you know your own family's stories now lost across the sea. Counting, calculating, managing debts, You are the unseen hand that keeps the wheels of commerce turning in Rome's bustling markets. The merchant treats you with a mix of irritation and dependence. You're indispensable, but still a slave. Your name isn't on the ledgers, but your work is the foundation of fortune. Then comes the secretary, the personal aide to a senator or magistrate. You're responsible for letters, contracts, secret memos, and political intrigues scribbled in the dead of night. You read words not meant for your eyes, notes that could topple careers or start wars. Your position is dangerous. One slip, one misplaced letter, and you could find yourself on the wrong side of power. But your Greek heritage gives you an edge. You're fluent in languages, educated in rhetoric and diplomacy. You weave the right words, temper the harsh, and smooth the rough. You live in a world of whispered secrets, shadowed hallways, and hidden alliances. Yet through all this, you are still a slave. Your freedom is an illusion. Your daily life is balanced on a knife's edge. One moment of favor could raise you. One moment of suspicion could ruin you. Despite this, you learn to maneuver. You observe the politics, the ambitions, the rivalries. You understand your masters not just as owners, but as players in a deadly game of power. Sometimes, when no one's watching, you write your own letters. You dream of freedom, of teaching not just a boy, but a generation. You hope one day the knowledge you carry will be your escape. In the harsh world of Rome, slaves like you were the invisible gears turning behind the empire's grandeur. The tutors who shaped future leaders, the clerks who balanced fortunes, and the secretaries who whispered the empire's darkest secrets. You might be a slave, but your mind is free. And that is a kind of power no chains can hold. You think you know now what it means to be a slave? Sure, maybe you picture the ones hauling stones under the blistering sun or toiling away in the fields, sweat blurring the days into endless misery. But now you're stepping behind the heavy curtains, past the murmurs of the bustling villa, into a world few ever glimpse. This is the bedroom, the private sanctum of your master, the place where power and vulnerability collide in strange, tangled ways. And you are a personal attendant, a whisper in the darkness, an invisible hand smoothing the silk, adjusting the pillow, or catching a master's whispered secrets like a sponge. Your days are ruled by an awkward intimacy, a strange dance of servitude and surveillance. The moment your master's heavy wooden door shuts behind you, the rules shift. You are no longer just a slave. You are an extension of their will, their comfort, their status. But you are still a slave, always. Your mornings begin early, long before the villa wakes. The room is cold, thick with the scent of last night's incense and stale wine. You move silently, carefully pulling back the heavy curtains to let the sun inch inside. The bed is enormous, draped with sheets softer than anything you'll ever touch again. You smooth the blankets with trembling fingers. This bed is a throne and a cage, the place where your master rules the day and hides his fears. Next, you light the oil lamps. Their flickering flames cast giant shadows on the walls, dancing ghosts that remind you of the unseen eyes always watching. The master awakens slowly, grumbling, tangled in the sheets, You're there with water to wash his face and a cloth to wipe away the grime of the night. You steady the basin, careful not to spill a drop. If you fail, you know the sharp tone of his voice will follow you for days. Some masters are kind in their own way. They might crack a rare smile or nod approval when you've done well. But most, they are impatient gods with little patience for anything but perfection. Your hands must be swift, silent, invisible. Dressing the master is a test of nerves and skill. Togas, tunics, layers upon layers of fabric tangled in knots and folds that mean status and wealth. You know exactly how each piece feels, how it should fall, how to avoid creases that would shame your household. Your fingers fumble through jewelry and pins, placing each item just so. A misplaced clasp could mean the difference between a compliment and a scolding, or worse. And then there are the more personal moments. The baths, for instance. You are the one who draws the water, tests the temperature, and assists your master into the steaming basin. You stand close enough to feel the heat and smell the mingled scents of oil and sweat. It's a job that requires trust, unspoken and uneasy. One false move, and you're a slave overstepping bounds. But if you hesitate, the master's temper flares. The bedroom isn't just a place of comfort. It's also where secrets are traded like coins. Your master confides in you more than anyone else, though you rarely speak back. You listen to whispered worries about politics, about enemies, about family betrayals. Sometimes the master's voice softens to a fearful murmur. Other times, it booms with anger at imagined conspiracies. You hold those secrets carefully, locked away inside you, because to spill them is to invite death. And then there's the whispering servants network, the spies within the household. Some personal attendants are recruited for their discretion and cleverness. They slip between rooms, eavesdropping on conversations meant to stay hidden. They carry messages, observe who comes and goes, who sleeps with whom, who plots against whom. Your job isn't just about fetching and folding, it's about surviving. Knowing too much can be dangerous, but knowing too little might mean losing your place, or worse. At night, when the villa quiets down and the other servants retreat to the dormitories, you stay by your master's side. The lamps burn low, shadows creep across the walls. Sometimes the master talks in his sleep, soft murmurs, names that don't mean anything to you, fears that cling to the dark. Sometimes you wonder if he fears you, the one who knows his every weakness. The bedroom is a paradox. It's the most private place, but also the most public. You move invisibly through this space, a ghost among the silks and marble. You clean the spills of wine no one else will see. You steady, trembling hands, and you protect the fragile ego of a man who wields more power than you can imagine. All the while, your own story remains silent, your name forgotten, your past erased. In this room, you exist only as a shadow behind a king, a servant behind a ruler. And yet, if you play your role well, if you navigate the tightrope of intimacy and obedience, this position might bring you closer to freedom than any other. A favor here, a whisper there, perhaps a chance to rise above your chains. But for now, you are the whisper in the bedroom, the secret keeper, the silent shadow, the one who knows the king's every breath and the price of that knowledge. You survived the auction block and live to see your first Roman sunrise as someone's property. But the story doesn't end there. No, it barely begins. Because in this world, slavery isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you pass on. Children born to slave mothers don't get the chance to grow up free. The moment they take their first breath, they become part of the trade, part of the system. Born to serve, born to obey, born to be owned. Imagine a child, barely able to crawl, who already knows the weight of chains in the air. They don't learn freedom or safety. They learn fear, obedience, and silence. Their cradle isn't soft. Their lullaby isn't sweet. It's the clink of metal, the harsh voice of a master, the quick step of a slave driver. You're a mother or a father in this endless cycle. You try to protect your child with what little you have, but the world is unkind. The law doesn't see your child as innocent. They see profit. They see labor. They see a future coin in the market. Raising a slave child means walking a tightrope between hope and despair. You teach them to hide their thoughts, to mask their pain, and to obey without question. You pray, quietly, desperately, that they'll survive the hard years, that they won't be separated from you, that their chains won't be heavier than yours. But sometimes they are. Children are sold apart from their parents. You don't get a say. They might be taken to a distant estate, their cries swallowed by the vastness of Roman roads. Or worse, sent to the city, where they become playthings or tools for strangers. The line between your child and your master's property blurs into nothing. They belong not to you, but to the empire. Their bodies, their futures, even their souls are claimed before they learn to walk. Yet, in secret moments, when no eyes are watching, you hold them close, whisper stories of freedom you've never known, and dream of a day when chains might break. Because born to serve doesn't mean born to surrender. You're standing in a sun-baked courtyard somewhere on the outskirts of Rome. Maybe it's a villa garden or the back lot of a bustling workshop. Doesn't matter. What matters is the scene unfolding before you. A man, naked except for a loincloth, is tied to a post. His back is red raw, lacerated by cruel marks. The air smells of sweat, blood, and fear. Around him, a small crowd watches in tense silence. Some faces are grim, others bored. The man gasps for breath, clutching the wood as the lash rises again. This is no accident. This is punishment. The reality of being a Roman slave. From the moment you're branded as property, fear becomes your constant companion. The Romans didn't just want obedience. They demanded terror. Discipline was brutal and public. It wasn't just about correction. It was about sending a clear message to anyone who dared to think themselves free. You might think, what did he do? Maybe he tried to run. Maybe he dropped a precious cup. Maybe he grumbled about his lot. Or maybe, like so many others, he simply didn't move fast enough to please his master. The lash is the answer. But it's never just the lash. Roman law was crystal clear. Slaves had no rights, only commands. And when you disobeyed, or even showed a hint of disrespect, your punishment was swift and merciless. Flogging was the most common penalty. But don't imagine a quick whipping. No, this was designed to hurt, to humiliate, and sometimes to kill. The whip itself was no ordinary tool. The flagrum was a short whip with several leather thongs, often weighted with bits of bone or metal. When it struck, it didn't just sting, it tore flesh. The pain radiated through muscles, leaving long-lasting scars or open wounds. Sometimes slaves bled to death from flogging. But flogging was only the beginning. If you were unlucky, or if the crime was serious, your punishment could get worse. There were cases when masters ordered crucifixion or being thrown to the wild beasts for rebellious slaves, and for those caught trying to escape repeatedly, the penalty could be death by burning or being thrown to gladiators in the arena. Imagine the terror of knowing that a single misstep could end with you nailed to a cross or tossed to starving lions. Even rumors of such punishments were enough to keep many slaves in line, eyes downcast and voices silent. But fear wasn't only physical. There was psychological torture, too. Masters often threatened to sell problem slaves to brutal owners in faraway provinces, where life was even harsher. The anxiety of being ripped from your only home and thrown into the unknown was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Sometimes, you weren't punished for actual crimes, but simply to reinforce your place. A master could order a slave beaten for no reason, to remind everyone who was in charge. You watch as the man tied to the post screams. A guard approaches with a bucket of water and douses the wounds, but the pain barely lessens. The man's eyes meet yours. You don't dare look away. You know the rules here. Never be the first to complain. Never look directly at your master. Never slow down. Because if you do, the punishment starts again. And this time, it might be worse. Even inside wealthy Roman houses, fear ruled the lives of slaves. Their masters saw them as tools, or sometimes worse, property to be discarded if broken. You don't get to rest. You don't get to mourn. You don't even get to be human. And if you try to resist, the law won't protect you. It's designed to crush hope. You think about the others you've met. The cook who lost an eye for spilling wine. The seamstress who was flogged for stitching a dress too slowly. The boy who disappeared after being caught stealing fruit from the market. Fear and pain were part of daily life, but it was also the glue that held the Roman world together. Because without it, masters believed slaves might rise up. And rise up, they did. But rebellion was costly, brutally crushed, with punishments so savage they became legends whispered in the dark. So you keep walking, head down, heart pounding, knowing that every step could be your last free one. Because in Rome, fear was a language everyone understood. And discipline? Discipline was its harshest dialect. You hear the scream before you smell the blood. Not that either one surprises you anymore. Screams are common in Roman households, especially big ones, when someone gets flogged or branded or locked in the cellar with rats for stealing a fig. The noises tend to echo through marble halls. You keep your head down and keep scrubbing. But this scream, it's different. It's sharp, final, and followed by silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just pause the day, but holds its breath. You freeze. So do the others. The cook grips her ladle mid-stir. The boy trimming the laurel hedge drops his shears. Even the dogs stop barking. Because deep down, Every slave knows what silence means in a Roman domus. Something terrible has happened. And if it's bad enough, it won't matter who actually did it. When a Roman master dies, especially if he's been murdered, the household doesn't go into mourning. It goes into lockdown. And if you're a slave, you're already guilty. The law sees to that. It's called the Lex Patronia. But don't let the fancy name fool you. It's not there to protect you. Quite the opposite. Passed during the early empire, it gives the state a way to say, if one of you breaks, all of you burn. Literally, in some cases. You heard the stories. Everyone has. One slave, under too much pressure, lashes out. Poison in the wine. A knife in the dark. A moment of panic or justice, or just plain madness. And then, the entire familia servorum, every slave under that roof, is hauled off for execution. Even the baby who hasn't learned to walk. Even the old woman who waters the basil. Even you, who couldn't point to the master's bedroom if your life depended on it. Not that it matters. Your life doesn't depend on anything anymore. It depends on nothing you can control. The last time it happened in Rome, under Emperor Nero no less, a wealthy senator named Pedanius Secundus was found dead in his bed. One slave did it. One. But the law said guilt flowed like blood through the veins of the household. The Senate debated whether all 400 slaves should die. People begged for mercy. Nero shrugged. The execution went ahead. 400 slaves. You're not even sure how they managed it. Crosses, maybe. Fire. Wild animals. Doesn't matter. The message was clear. If you so much as breathe rebellion, you take your entire family with you. So today, you wait. You and every other trembling shadow in the villa. You listen to the stomp of sandals on marble, the barked orders of the magistrate's men. Your stomach knots. Not because you're guilty, but because someone else might be, and you'll pay the same price. You think about running, but where would you go? You've got a branded arm, no citizen's cloak, and no friends beyond these walls. The roads are watched, the markets whisper. No one hides a fugitive slave for long, not unless they want to end up flogged or nailed to a post beside you. Hours pass. The steward calls everyone into the atrium. You stand shoulder to shoulder with the others. Cooks, tutors, laundresses, stable boys, that one angry old man who cleans the lamps and talks to himself in Greek. The magistrate paces in front of you, toying with a wax tablet and pretending to be calm. You feel like meat waiting for inspection. Again. And then, the moment arrives. A guard pulls a boy, barely older than 15, into the center of the group. He's shaking, his tunic stained. Someone gasps. The cook whispers a prayer under her breath. You hear only 5 words from the magistrate's lips. Confessed, poisoned, the master's wine. The boy falls to his knees. You expect the soldiers to fall on him. Instead, they look at you. Because under the law, guilt doesn't stay neat and tidy. It splashes. It spreads. The magistrate recites the statute from memory. You already know the words. Any household where a master is killed by a slave? Collective guilt. Collective punishment. But then, something strange happens. The steward speaks. He argues. Says there were dozens of slaves, hundreds even, who couldn't possibly have known. Who had no access to the wine. who were infants, who were blind. He pleads for reason. Maybe he's worried about the financial loss. Maybe he's grown attached to one or two of you. Maybe he just wants to avoid the stench of burning flesh fouling his garden. Whatever the reason, the magistrate considers. After hours of deliberation, the verdict comes down. Partial clemency. Not mercy, just math. Some of you will be spared. Others, anyone who worked in the kitchen, in the dining hall, or in the master's wing, will not. You're told to stand to the left or the right, depending on your role. You step carefully, heart thudding, unsure which side will be the one that lives. The boy is dragged away. No one speaks. Later that night, you stare at the ceiling of the servants' quarters, unable to sleep. A young girl lies silently on the mat beside you. Her sister didn't make it. She didn't cry. Not once. You think about what it means to live like this. To be a breathing coin in someone else's purse. To be punished not just for your crimes, but for the crimes of your chainmates, your co-workers, the people who share your food, your floor, your fate. And you wonder, what kind of world builds a law like that? The Roman world, of course, where loyalty is demanded, mercy is rare. And survival? That's not a right. It's a privilege. Now, you've made the decision. And once you've made it, you can't unmake it. It starts as a whisper in your skull, quiet and stupid. What if you just ran? Not now, not this second. But maybe tomorrow. Maybe when the guard turns his back. Maybe when the overseer drinks too much sour wine again and forgets to chain the gate. You know it's madness. You've seen what happens. The whip, the branding iron, the metal collar that turns your neck into a prison. Or worse, crucifixion nailed up like a warning sign along the Appian Way. But the thought lingers, festers. Because here's the truth. Life in a Roman villa isn't life. It's repetition. Wake before the sun. Work until your spine creaks. Eat something barely food. Try not to die. Sleep. Repeat. Maybe you're a field hand. Maybe a kitchen slave. Maybe you empty chamber pots for a senator who doesn't remember your face. Doesn't matter. You're invisible. But your pain is very real. So tonight, when the thunder distracts the dogs and the stable door creaks just a little too wide, you move. Quiet, fast, barefoot on wet stone, heart hammering, hands trembling. You don't take anything? There's nothing to take. Just yourself and your broken Latin and the impossible idea that somewhere, out beyond the fields and the roads and the soldiers, freedom exists. The first night is all adrenaline. You're not smart yet. You stay too close to the road. You run like someone will shout your name. No one does. By dawn, your lungs burn. Your legs ache. And worst of all, you're hungry. No one tells you that escaping is less about stealth and more about starving quietly. You drink from a ditch. You eat weeds. You nearly cry over a stale crust some traitor throws away. You keep going. The roads stretch forever. Roman roads always do. You know better than to beg in daylight. Your shaved head and worn tunic screams slave. So you hide by day, move by night, sleep in ditches, avoid fire, avoid temples, avoid patrols. It doesn't take long before your body starts betraying you. Your ankles swell. Your back knots. You smell like mold and sweat and desperation. And then, one night, as you're crouching near a fig tree behind a village inn, thinking maybe you could sneak in and steal something. Anything. You hear the hoofbeats. 2 riders. Fast. Focused. Not soldiers. Worse. Fugitiveri. Professional slave catchers. Paid by men like your master to drag back their property, no matter the distance. These aren't city guards who'll forget your face. These men know how to track by footprint, by rumor, by the smell of fear. You freeze. They don't stop. Just gallop past, like you're not even worth slowing down for. Not yet. But they will come back. They always come back. You change direction. Weeks pass, or maybe it's days. Time is funny now, measured in scabs and stolen bread crusts. At one point, you meet others. 2 men escaped from a quarry near Naples. Their backs are raw from whips. One coughs blood when he laughs. They teach you to chew pine needles to fight hunger. They show you where to hide your scent from dogs. They speak of the mountains, of a place where runaways live like ghosts in the rocks, hunting rats and living free. You never find it. The 3 of you try to rob a merchant cart. It goes badly. One of the men is speared through the chest. The other bolts. You run too. You never see them again. Your reward? A wanted notice, inked on plaster and nailed to a tavern post. There's your face, poorly drawn. A name you no longer answer to. A reward big enough that anyone with a conscience and empty purse will turn you in. So you stop speaking. You cover your head. You keep your eyes low. But it's too late. One evening, in a crumbling market on the edge of nowhere, someone recognizes you. Maybe it's your limp. Maybe your accent. Maybe you looked just a little too hopeful. You feel the hand on your shoulder. You try to run. You don't get far. They don't kill you. You're worth more alive. But they make an example out of you. First comes the collar, forged iron, cold against your skin. Riveted shut so you can't take it off. Sometimes it has your master's name etched on it. Sometimes it simply says fugitive, just in case anyone forgets. Then the branding. A hot iron to your cheek or your thigh or your hand. You don't scream. You've forgotten how. And finally, the walk. Chained. Public. Humiliating. Through the forum, where people point and laugh and shout things in Latin you now understand too well. A child throws a fig at your face. You don't react. Back at the estate, you're not spoken to. Not yet. The steward gives you the whip first. 20 lashes. Maybe 30. Enough to bleed, not enough to die. Death is wasteful. Then, and only then, does your master approach. He looks at you like something scraped off his sandal. He doesn't ask why you ran. He just tells you the rules have changed. No more sleeping inside, no more speaking. You'll eat after the animals. You'll wear a red tunic so no one forgets what you did. You will never leave the estate walls again. And if you try, next time it's the cross. And yet, despite everything, you still remember what it felt like. That first night, that silence, the sky without chains. You wake to the sound of shouting and iron. Again. It's been weeks since you were bought, marched, branded, and locked in this hellish stone school. A ludus, they call it. A training ground for Rome's favorite blood sport. You, lucky you, are being molded into a gladiator, which is just a fancy way of saying dead man in waiting. It could have been worse, you suppose? Some of the others were dragged to textile mills or salt mines, where lungs fill with dust and bones rot before 30. But here, at least, they feed you well. You're valuable. Meat for the masses. You eat more now than you ever did as a free man. Bread, beans, barley porridge, and dried figs, all to thicken you into something worth betting on. A scrawny gladiator dies fast. A thick one dies slow, more thrilling for the crowd. But food doesn't buy mercy. Every day starts before sunrise. You're hauled out to the dirt courtyard, ringed by columns, where the lanista, your trainer, your owner, your god now, barks orders in clipped Latin. He used to be a fighter himself, back when his knees worked. Now he shapes slaves into killers. You train with wooden swords heavier than real ones to make the real thing feel light later. You spar until your arms shake and your knuckles split. You learn to dodge, to parry, to fall with dignity. You learn that fear is your worst enemy, besides the man with a trident charging at your gut. Sometimes the lanista lines you up and watches you stand in silence for hours, just to see who breaks first. Sometimes he lets the veterans loose on the rookies, to remind everyone what losing looks like. You learn quickly, or you don't last long enough to regret it. You share your cell with 3 others. One's a Gaul, with fire in his eyes. One's a Greek who mutters to the gods each night. The last used to be a Roman soldier until he pissed off the wrong patrician and woke up in chains. All of you sleep on straw. All of you smell like sweat and fear. But there's a bond between you, a strange brotherhood. You all know what's coming. Eventually, the day arrives. The games. You're shoved onto a cart and trundled to the amphitheatrum. It's not the Colosseum. You're not that special, but it's still huge, humming with thousands of voices eager for violence. You can hear them before you even see the sky. Then you're in the arena, standing under that blinding sun, sand in your sandals, and blood already soaking into the dirt from the last fight. The crowd roars. Not for you. They don't know your name, but for the spectacle, for the promise of screams. Your opponent steps out. You've never seen him before. Maybe he's nervous too. Maybe he's been doing this for years. Doesn't matter. The horn sounds, and suddenly, you're not a person anymore. You're a performance. You fight like you trained, sweat in your eyes, heart in your throat. The sword feels slippery. The noise of the crowd comes in waves. You land a hit. Then he lands one harder. You bleed. They cheer. When it ends, you're still alive. Barely. The loser doesn't rise. The editor, the official in charge, glances to the crowd. They give a thumbs up. The loser is spared. Not lucky, just delayed. You're dragged back down, body aching, ears ringing. But you're alive. And that, in the arena, is rare currency. Not all slaves bled on the sand. Some were sent to the theaters, where the killing was less literal, but no less cruel. Imagine you weren't built for the arena. Too thin, too young, too clever. Maybe your voice is your curse. Maybe your face. You end up on stage. Roman theater was a strange beast, a chaotic blend of drama, parody, and vulgarity. The playwrights had names, but the performers? Disposable, often slaves, especially if the role demanded humiliation. You could be dressed as a donkey, or a god, or worse, both. The crowd didn't care about your pride. They wanted laughs, lewdness, and noise. So you danced, shouted, mimed, and obeyed. Sometimes you played women, sometimes monsters, sometimes fools. Always you bowed. Some roles weren't roles at all. Ever heard of execution plays? Public dramas where condemned slaves acted out myths and actually died doing it. A man playing Prometheus really got chained and whipped. A man playing Icarus really fell to his death. You don't fake a beheading when the sword is real. It wasn't art. It was punishment with props. You remember the stories passed around the slave quarters of a man who played Orpheus so well they let him live, or a woman whose beauty saved her from the final act. Lies, probably. But you whisper them anyway, because hope's the last thing they can't confiscate. So whether you were hurled into the sand to die for sport, or painted gold and shoved on stage to be mocked, entertainment in Rome was a dangerous honor for the enslaved. You weren't a performer. You were a prop. You didn't take a bow. You took orders. And if you didn't make the crowd laugh, or scream, or cheer loudly enough, there was always someone else waiting in line. You wake before dawn. Not that you really slept. Stone floors don't cradle dreams. And dreams, if you had any left, aren't worth the trouble they bring. The overseer's voice slices through the gloom, barking orders in clipped Latin. You barely speak it, but the tone is clear. Move or bleed. So you rise with the others, bones aching, muscles stiff, eyes half shut from another too short night, and shuffle into the line that leads outside. You're a public slave now, not owned by a person, but by the Roman state itself. Congratulations. That means you won't be worked to death in a villa kitchen or used as entertainment in someone's banquet hall. No, your job is simpler. Build Rome. Brick by bloody brick. Today, it's an aqueduct. Or maybe a road, a temple, a bathhouse. It doesn't matter. You don't get to choose. All you know is it's long, hard, and heavy. Everything about it is heavy. The tools, the stones, the silence between you and the man beside you, who stopped talking a month ago, after a scaffolding collapse crushed his brother's legs. You cross the forum before sunrise, and even in the blue haze of morning, you can feel the empire watching. Senators in white togas pass by without a glance. You're part of the scenery, like gutters or pigeons. Infrastructure. At the site, the pace is brutal. You lift, you dig, you haul. No gloves, no shoes, unless you were clever enough to steal a pair from a dead man. Blisters become calluses. Calluses crack. You stop noticing the blood. Or maybe you just stop caring. There are hundreds of you, men from every corner of the empire. Nubians, Gauls, Greeks, Syrians. Some whisper prayers in foreign tongues before the work begins. Others just stare into the dirt and mutter curses. You're all chained together, loosely but enough to remind you, no one's going anywhere. A Roman engineer oversees the project, standing in the shade with a wax tablet in hand, gesturing like a god with blueprints. He doesn't lift a finger, but he knows how many meters the arch needs to span and how deep the foundation must be. If it crumbles, it's not his back that pays. It's yours. You move blocks so large it seems impossible they were ever meant to be moved by human hands. Levers, pulleys, ropes, sometimes even elephants. And when that doesn't work, brute force. You and 50 others strain against the weight of a column shaft while your legs shake and your breath wheezes like bellows. When you finish one arch, another waits, then another, and another. There's always more to build, always another vision of Roman glory that depends entirely on your broken spine and someone else's coin. At midday, you get a handful of olives, maybe bread, water if the foreman remembers. The sun climbs high, and your skin blisters under it. No shade, no rest. You work until your limbs feel carved from the same stone you're hauling. And then, you work more. You've seen men die here, crushed under granite, sliced open by snapped rope. One fell from scaffolding and hit the ground like a dropped melon. No one screamed, just a grunt, a twitch, and then stillness. The others kept working. What else could they do? Some days, you lay the roads themselves, Roman roads, the pride of the empire. You lay volcanic stone and gravel in perfect lines, stretching towards cities you'll never see, crossing lands you'll never walk freely again. All roads lead to Rome, they say, but none lead out. Other days, you sculpt the marble blocks that will someday frame bathhouses you'll never bathe in, forums you'll never vote in, temples where only citizens may pray. You carve beauty from stone, but no one will remember your name, only the architects. Still, there are moments, brief, bitter ones, where you pause and look at what you've done. A towering aqueduct arches across a dry valley like a god's ribcage. Water will flow through it soon. Cool, clean water for Roman elites to bathe in and sip from silver goblets. You won't drink it, but you made it. With your sweat, with your hands. And even if your name is never carved into the monument, your blood is in the mortar. The day ends only when the overseer says it ends. Your limbs don't really move anymore. They just sort of lurch. You walk back in silence, coated in dust and sunburn. The city gleams around you like a polished lie. Tourists and traders admire the progress. The glory of Rome, they say. You built that glory, and for it, you'll die early, nameless, and free only when the grave finally opens. Back in your cell, you lie on cold stone. No dreams tonight, just the steady hum of distant hammers, echoing into tomorrow, because Rome is eternal, and someone has to build it. You don't remember who gave you to the gods, only that no one asked if you wanted to go. Maybe you were born into it. Maybe your owner owed a vow or a debt and thought your body was a fair offering. Or maybe you were one of the unlucky ones, bought not for labor or pleasure, but for silence, permanent silence. But here you are now, standing at the marble threshold of a temple that smells like incense, old blood, and crushed myrrh. It's the kind of place where people walk softly and speak in whispers, where stone gods glare down from the walls with blank, unblinking stares. You are not free, but unlike most slaves, you don't belong to a man. You belong to something far more complicated, the divine. Your day starts before the sun does, before the market stirs, before the roosters even bother. The priests rise early, and so must you. Your job, for now, is simple. Prepare. You sweep the steps. You wash the floors with freezing water. You light the oil lamps along the colonnade one by one, until the shadows stretch long, and the sanctuary glows gold, like dawn, caught in a jar. You are not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You must avert your eyes when the high priest passes. You wear a simple tunic dyed with saffron, marking you as a temple slave, owned by the deity, protected by law, but still expendable. Some days, you help with the sacrifices. Not the big ones, the bulls and oxen brought by senators and generals. Those are for trained hands. You fetch the basin, catch the blood, scrub the stones after. You never get used to the sound an animal makes when its throat is opened wide. But you learn to do your part quickly, quietly, without flinching. Hesitation is noticed and punished. Other days, your tasks are more delicate. You help grind herbs for ritual ointments. You wash the feet of pilgrims. You clean the sacred knives with wool and vinegar. On feast days, you carry baskets of offerings, honey cakes, wine, roasted birds, up the temple steps, careful not to stumble. To drop a sacred object is more than clumsiness. It's a fence, an omen, a bad one. Still, there are worse roles than yours. The girl in the inner sanctum, for example. She's not allowed outside the temple walls, not ever. She serves the goddess in silence, her hair uncut, her body considered pure, which means no one's supposed to touch her. Supposed to. But you hear things. You see the bruises. You keep your head down. And then there are the unlucky few. Once a year, maybe less, rumors whisper through the cloisters like smoke. A sacrifice is coming. Not an animal, not a cake, something else, something warm. In some temples, it's tradition. In others, it's quiet, illegal, forgotten, until the drought stretches too long or the war gets too costly. Then someone remembers the old ways. They never say it out loud, but you know. The priest who walks slower, the way the others avoid your eyes, the sudden kindness. You learn what a farewell looks like when it doesn't involve words. You don't know where they go, only that they don't come back. Some say they're buried under the altar, a gift sealed in stone. Others say they're led deep into caves, their blood spilled on earth where gods are said to sleep. A few say it's all nonsense, but the empty beds, the closed-mouthed priests, the sudden hush that falls over the sanctuary, that's real enough. Still, you keep working. In time, you rise. The temple needs people who know its rhythms, and you've proven useful. You help teach the new ones, the children born into this place with no clue how to walk without being noticed. You show them which floors creak, which priest likes his wine hot, which corners to cry in if they need to. You begin to take pride in the silence, the ritual, the weight of it all. Because in a strange way, this temple gives you something that most slaves never get: purpose. You aren't breaking rocks or fetching grapes. You're part of something larger, older, sacred. People bow when they enter. They offer gold, spices, coins. And here you are, sweeping their offerings into baskets with calloused hands. And when someone asks why you're here, you don't say, "I was taken." You say, "I serve." But never forget, you don't serve by choice. Not really. Because even in this holy place, your body is still not your own. If the priests say fast, you starve. If the festival calls for dancing, you learn the steps. If the god demands silence, you hold your tongue until your throat aches. And if the oracle points at you with glassy eyes and says your blood will bring the rains, then you walk forward. You don't run. Because running never works here. The gods see everything. Or so you've been taught. Years pass. The oil lamps grow heavier. Your knees ache from kneeling, but you know every line of the temple now, every crack in the altar, every whisper behind the curtain. You've watched new slaves cry on their first day. You've seen priests grow old and die. You've scrubbed blood from stone with your bare hands and listened to thunder roll overhead like approval. You no longer remember the name you had before. But every time the wind rustles the offering leaves, every time the flame flickers in a prayer bowl, you wonder if the gods remember you, or if they ever knew your name at all. You don't own your life, but with a bit of luck and the right master, you just might rent a few pieces of it back. It starts with a word, peculium, Latin for a handful of things, literally. A private stash, a personal fund, a secret scrap of dignity tucked away beneath a world of chains. Not every slave gets one, and not every master allows it. But if you're clever, patient, and born into the right corner of servitude, it might just be your ticket out. Your master, for example, is a businessman. Not kind, exactly, but practical. He knows that if you work harder, faster, with a little more sparkle in your eye, you'll bring in more denarii for his workshop. So he makes you an offer, muttered in the casual voice Romans use when pretending they're being generous. Keep a fraction of what you earn. A little reward for obedience, for loyalty, for not running away last month. It's not much. A few coppers here. A silver coin if you're very lucky. But it's yours, sort of. Technically, your peculium still belongs to your master. If he changes his mind, it vanishes like smoke. If he dies, the estate absorbs it. If his cousin gets in a bad mood, it's confiscated. And yet, it's something. And something for a slave is everything. You don't bury your coins under your cot. That's how you lose toes and trust. No, you tuck them into clever places. Pay a freedman to hide it. Sew it into your sandals. Keep it behind a brick in the storeroom. Because each coin, each glint of metal, is not just money. It's time. It's hope. It's a countdown to something Rome rarely offers. Manumissio, freedom. But don't get excited yet. First, you'll have to stay alive, and sane, and useful. That means showing up early to the market, hauling jars twice your size, memorizing every buyer's name and their cousin's cheese preferences. It means smiling when the steward forgets your name again, or when he doesn't forget and uses it like a curse. It means being invisible until being needed, and then indispensable without being threatening. Some days, you wonder if the freedom you're working toward is just another trick. After all, even freedmen walk with a certain stiffness. They owe their patron, their former master, lifelong respect and favors. They can't run for high office. They can't become knights. And if they slip up, socially or legally, they're dragged back into bondage faster than you can say manarchy. But then you hear about it. Whispers between slaves in the bathhouse. Someone bought their freedom. A cook in Trastevere, a tutor from Gaul, a scribe who saved for 20 years and finally handed over a purse so full it silenced the whole villa. And suddenly, the dream feels real. You start counting days instead of coins. You measure time in baskets lifted, amphorae poured, errands completed. Your master praises your work, calls you useful. That's dangerous. Sometimes it means he'll keep you forever. But sometimes it means you're worth cash. Liquid cash. Enough that freeing you for a price is more appealing than feeding you for life. Maybe he lets you rent a stall in the market on your day off, sell your own crafts, take private commissions. Maybe you start teaching the master's son to read. Maybe a Roman lady pays you extra to teach her pet monkey tricks, because the city is absurd and everyone has their hobbies. Whatever it is, the peculium grows. You fantasize about the ceremony. It's quiet, usually. Just your master, a witness, a wax tablet. Sometimes it happens in a temple, before the gods. Other times in front of a magistrate. If your master is feeling theatrical, he might stage it as a mock trial. I accuse this slave of being free. The audience laughs. You try not to faint. If it goes well, you become a libertus, a freedman. You get a name, the master's family name, plus a chosen one of your own. You might even get a pileus, a little felt cap, like a trophy for surviving one of the oldest systems of suffering ever invented. But of course, it doesn't always go well. Sometimes masters die before you can make the deal. Sometimes they lie. Sometimes the money disappears. And sometimes, worst of all, they offer you freedom, then take it back, because they can. There's no refund for hope. And yet, you keep going, because even the chance of maybe is better than nothing. Because in this twisted game of domination and decorum, peculium is your loophole, your glitch in the system, your whisper of self inside a world that's tried to scrape your name off the stone. You're not alone, either. Roman society is filled with former slaves, bakers, poets, merchants, midwives. Some are rich, some are powerful. Some even own slaves themselves, a fact that makes you want to scream. But others remember. They speak softly when they see the mark of chains on your wrists. They help. Or at least, they don't hinder. Maybe one day you'll walk past your old master in the forum. Maybe you'll bow politely, then turn away with your hands empty and your pockets full. Maybe you'll teach your children to read Latin and Greek, and they'll never know the inside of a slave market. Maybe. But for now, you wake before dawn. You lace your sandals tighter, where the coin is hidden. You carry the wine jugs to the cart, and you smile when the master steward barks your name, because each hour, each coin, is a brick in a road leading somewhere else. And in Rome, where even emperors fall and rise again, that's about as close to freedom as it gets. So you did it. Somehow, maybe through loyalty, maybe through years of good service, or maybe just because your master had a rare flash of mercy, you got your freedom. There was no parade, no soaring speech, just a ceremony, maybe in a temple, maybe in your master's atrium, where he stood before witnesses and declared you libertus, free. They gave you a cap, the pileus, and your name changed. You took part of your former master's name now, like a scar stitched into your identity. And just like that, the chains came off. But you didn't float away. You didn't soar into the Roman sky and vanish among the stars. You stayed where you were. And very quickly, you realized something. Freedom wasn't free. First, let's talk about your master. Former master, technically, but you still call him Patronus, out of habit, out of necessity, because he's not just some guy from your past. He owns a chunk of your future. You owe him obsequium. That's Roman for respect, but in practice, it's more like legally mandated groveling. You visit him regularly. You speak well of him, always. If he needs you for a task, you don't say no. You go when he calls, even if it's inconvenient, even if you're sick, even if you're tired, because your patron is your lifeline now, and you never forget it. You also owe him opry, a fixed number of work days each year, like taxes paid in sweat. Maybe he has you copy documents, or help with his business, or run errands in the city. It's unpaid, of course. Freedom doesn't come with wages. And then there's inheritance. If you somehow manage to scrape together enough for a will, your patron gets a slice, automatically, no matter what. It's the Roman way. But let's back up a little. You walk through the forum now, cap on your head, trying to hold your spine straighter. You're technically a Roman citizen. You can marry legally. You can own property. You can even vote in the assembly. Though your voice is the tiniest one in the noisiest room. You're low on the totem pole, just above women, just above the very poor. When people look at you, they still see a slave. Maybe not physically. Your back is scarred, but your clothes are better now. You've got shoes. You might even have a rented room somewhere with a real door. But you don't forget your accent, your calloused hands, your silence in crowds. Other freedmen walk past you, some well-dressed, some successful. A few have shops, taverns, even small shipping businesses. They're respected in a way, but always with an asterisk. Romans never quite let go of your past. Born free is a badge they wear proudly. You didn't earn that badge. You earned scars. Still, you hustle, because now you can. You're no longer waiting for orders. You're chasing opportunities. You learn Latin better. You network in the bathhouses. You send your son to school because maybe, just maybe, he can be more than a freedman's son. Maybe he can blend in. Maybe he can forget where he came from. But you never forget. When the law calls for witnesses, you remember you're still second class. Certain offices are closed to you. You'll never be a senator, never be a knight, never be in charge of anything that truly matters in the state. You can't wear the broad purple stripe. You can't sit in the good seats at the theater. You're a ghost in the city's grand story. There, but only in the margins. And yet, the obligations never stop. Your patron can summon you at dawn, ask you to lend him money, ask you to help marry off one of his relatives. He's not always cruel. Sometimes he genuinely thinks of you as family. But Roman family is a web of favors, not feelings. If you refuse him, he can bring charges, ruin your name, drag you through court. It's happened before. A freedman got bold once, claimed he owed nothing more to the man who had freed him. The court sided with the patron. Of course it did. So you nod, you agree, you deliver the package, attend the banquet, fake the laugh, because the cap on your head might mark you as free, but your heart still beats like it did in the pen when you were just another pair of hands for sale. But there are small victories. You save. Slowly. You learn what sells. Maybe olive oil. Maybe dyed wool. You partner with others. Sometimes former slaves like you. Sometimes freeborn Romans who don't ask too many questions. You start to make a name. Some nights, you look at your son asleep on his straw mattress and feel something strange. something you haven't felt since before the ship, before the pen, before the ash in your hair. Hope. He'll never know what it was like to stand naked on a platform while strangers decided your worth. He won't call anyone Dominus. He'll be a Roman citizen from the start, not just in name, in heart, in future. You'll make sure of it. And when you die, quietly, hopefully not too soon, maybe they'll carve your tombstone in real marble. Maybe it'll say Libertus, freedman of Lucius, whatever his name was. Maybe it'll list your trade, your sons, a short line of pride buried in the dust of empire. You'll still be part of someone else's story. But at least, in the end, it will be yours too. You hear the whispers long before you hear the name. Spartacus. At first, it's just a murmur passed between hands grinding grain or backs bent in vineyards. Nothing loud, nothing bold, just a word, a breath, spoken in corners where no overseer dares linger too long. But that whisper carries something dangerous. Hope. You're not sure where it starts. Maybe in Capua, where the gladiator schools keep men like caged lions. Or maybe in the hills of Lucania, where escaped slaves slip through forests like ghosts. Wherever it is, it spreads like wildfire. Not just among gladiators with arms like tree trunks, but among kitchen girls, field workers, scribes, and shepherds. Even in chains, people listen. Even with lashes on their backs, they wonder, what if? Because Spartacus wasn't just a man. He was the man, a Thracian, a former soldier, turned captive, turned gladiator, turned rebel. No one rises from a blood-slicked arena to challenge Rome itself. No one, unless the gods have truly gone mad. And for 2 solid years, it seems like they had. The stories come in drips and gasps. He escaped with 70 gladiators, armed only with kitchen knives and stolen cleavers. They stormed out of their ludus and into history. They didn't just vanish into the countryside. They recruited. Farmers, field slaves, herdsmen, women, children. Rome laughed. Then Rome bled. Within months, the rebel army swells to tens of thousands. You hear they built camps, trained in formation, burned estates? To ash. They weren't just running. They were fighting back. And every noble in Rome tightened their grip on the whip. Because here's the truth. For all Rome's grandeur, for all its marble arches and golden statues, the whole thing is propped up on trembling legs. Yours, the enslaved, make up nearly 1/3 of Italy's population. The patricians know it. And the thought of those masses rising, screaming for justice, that's not rebellion. That's apocalypse. You watch your master flinch at shadows. You see guards posted at night, more than usual. They speak in hushed tones, read messages with shaking hands, and they punish harder. Any talk of Spartacus gets the lash. Any gathering of more than 3 earns suspicion. Rome's afraid, and that makes them cruel. But the rebellion lives on in glances. A look shared across the latrine, a nod in the vineyard. No words needed, just the silent admission. We are many, they are few. Then, one day, it ends. You hear that Crassus, a general with a fortune as bloated as his ego, finally traps Spartacus in the south. They say he crucified 6,000 of them, lined the Via Appia with their bodies for miles. The message is clear. This is what happens when you dream too loudly. You never see those crosses, but you feel them. Because the aftermath isn't silence, it's surveillance. Rome doubles down. Harsher laws, more patrols, slave collars engraved with names and threats. You know if you run, they'll find you. And if they don't, your family suffers instead. Still, Spartacus didn't die for nothing. He proved something. That Rome was vulnerable. That the system could crack. That even the lowest could rise, if only for a moment, and shake the mighty. And he wasn't the only one. There had been others. Ennis in Sicily, who called himself a prophet and led thousands to revolt in the Second Servile War. He burned fields, stormed cities, crowned himself king of the slaves. His rebellion lasted years. And then there was Salvius, an Athenian. Each time, Rome crushed them, but the smoke never quite cleared. And not all rebellions shouted. Some were quiet. The missing tool, accidentally, dropped in the well. The cart that just happened to break on market day. The batch of bread that spoiled. The horse that slipped. The field left half-weeded. These were the rebellions that didn't end in bloodbaths, but in slow sabotage, death by inconvenience. Others ran, disappeared into mountains, hid in caves, banded together in outlaw colonies. The Romans called them latrones, bandits. But they were just former slaves who had chosen freedom over fear. Most didn't last long. But the very fact they tried, that was its own kind of war. And then there were the ones who stayed, but never submitted. The slave who memorized Latin to forge documents. The housemaid who poisoned her master's wine. The wet nurse who whispered old songs into noble ears. Songs from home. Songs of resistance. These weren't generals, but they were just as dangerous. Because they kept the fire burning. You keep your head down. For now. But some nights, as you lie on the cold stone of the slave quarters, you remember the story of Spartacus. You imagine what it must have felt like to fight with a sword instead of behind one, to choose your direction, your fate, your name. And though the guards still watch, and the walls still stand, and Rome still crushes anything that moves too fast, you remember something important. Rebellion is not always fire. Sometimes, it's the ember that refuses to die. You're sitting on a stone bench, your knees dusted with marble flakes, trying to rub life back into your wrists after a long day of grinding wheat. The overseer's gone for now. The sun is low, and you can just make out the silhouettes of wealthy men drifting past in silk-trimmed togas. They speak in lofty tones, their hands gesturing like dancers as they discuss justice, wisdom, virtue. The air smells of roasted olives and ideas you'll never be allowed to have. You hear a name, Cicero. You know that one. He's important. A big thinker, orator, former consul. Killed for saying too much, they say, but he said it beautifully. And what did Cicero say about you? That you were, what was the word? Instrumentum vocale. A talking tool. Not quite a person. More than an ox, less than a man. Something useful, but replaceable. Justified by nature. It sounds elegant in Latin. Most things do. Cicero believed in a great natural order. Slaves, he argued, weren't born under the wrong star. They were simply fulfilling the role nature assigned. A citizen should rule. A slave should serve. Harmony, balance, peace. Your chains? Just part of the grand design. You, breaking your back in a vineyard, weren't being oppressed. You were fulfilling your cosmic duty. Congratulations. You lean back against the wall, letting the stone cool your spine, wondering how it is that philosophy always seems to work in favor of the people holding the whip. But Cicero was just the start. A few decades later, along came Seneca, the Stoic, the wise man, tutor to Nero, though perhaps not his best subject. Seneca wrote many things about self-control, tranquility, the importance of virtue, and about you. He said slaves were, in fact, human beings, that they should be treated fairly, even kindly, that masters should remember fortune can change. Today, you own a slave. Tomorrow, you are one. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Almost like compassion. Almost. But Seneca wasn't about to suggest freeing you. Oh no. Slavery, he said, was still a social reality, just one that ought to be navigated ethically. Be a better master, not no master at all. It was a philosophy of accommodation, not revolution. You might get a better blanket out of it. You wouldn't get your freedom. They were clever, these Romans. They wrapped the iron fist of domination in the velvet glove of reason. They called slavery natural, inevitable, ancient, even divine. Didn't Aristotle say something similar, long before Rome rose to glory? That some men are slaves by nature, born with bodies fit for labor, and minds too dull for freedom? The Romans borrowed freely from Greek thought, ideas as well as statues. And once those ideas were absorbed, the state began to spin them into something bigger. You start to notice it everywhere. In mosaics showing happy slaves pouring wine, in statues of kneeling servants carved into the sides of noble tombs, in plays where the comic relief is always the clever slave, outwitting his master but never escaping him. Even in household shrines, where gods like Laris and Penates guard the hearth, and sometimes the master's right to own you. Then there were the laws, the 12 tables, the backbone of Roman legal thought, allowed the killing of slaves without formal consequence. Later, laws refined this, not out of pity, but to protect property. If your master beat you to death, someone else might sue for damages, not because your life mattered, but because it had value, like a lost ox or a broken cart. You see, Rome didn't just rely on brute force to maintain slavery. It relied on culture, on language, on the daily drumbeat of logic that told free citizens they were just a little closer to the gods, and slaves a little closer to the animals. Even religion played along. The gods of Rome didn't object to slavery. Jupiter thundered, Mars raged, Venus seduced, but none ever lifted a divine finger to question the chains clinking through every villa courtyard. Priests owned slaves, temples used them, sacrifices were prepared by them. And if you were very unlucky, you were the sacrifice. But perhaps the most sinister part wasn't the violence. It was the silence, the fact that so few people questioned it. To be Roman was to believe in order, and in the Roman mind, slavery was simply part of how the world worked, just like rain fell or empires rose. Most didn't ask why, and those who did, those few voices whispering that maybe, just maybe, a human being shouldn't belong to another, were lost in the roar of empire. You blink up at the darkening sky and wonder what would have happened if they had, if Cicero had said, no man should be owned, if Seneca had freed his own slaves instead of writing pretty words about kindness, if philosophers to turn their scrolls into shields, their logic into rebellion. But they didn't. And so, here you are, bone sore, spirit numb, trying not to imagine the next day, or the one after that, knowing that even if your body survives, your name won't. You'll vanish into the footnotes of someone else's greatness. And the men who justified it, they'll be remembered as wise. You've spent years waking with the sun and sleeping like the dead. You've survived masters, markets, fevers, and beatings. You've learned Latin, or at least enough to follow orders. You've kept your head down and your eyes low. You've cleaned vomit, cooked feasts you couldn't taste, laughed at jokes you didn't understand. And somehow, you're still standing. And today, something's different. The master calls you by name, your real name, or at least the one you've worn long enough to believe. No curses, no chores, just a nod, a pause, and then tomorrow. The forum. You know what that means, or you think you do, because no one says it aloud. Not at first. It's too fragile, too dangerous to speak out loud. But you let the hope flicker anyway. A dangerous, beautiful hope. Manumission. Freedom. It doesn't happen often, not like in the stories. Most slaves die slaves, bones buried in soil they never owned. But once in a while, once in 100, the master decides you've earned something more. Maybe you nursed his wife through fever. Maybe you raised his son. Maybe you were just clever, quiet, and useful. Or maybe he's old and wants to tie up loose ends before Jupiter calls him home. Doesn't matter. What matters is this. Tomorrow, your life changes. You hardly sleep. You turn the words over and over in your head. Friedman, Libertus, Libertina. It sounds too fine for your mouth. You don't know what freedom feels like. Not really. Is it a weight lifted? A new chain, thinner but tighter? You'll find out. Morning breaks hot and bright. You're dressed better than usual. Not fancy, but clean. You walk behind the master's litter, through Rome's teeming streets, every stone of the forum familiar and strange at once. You're not the only one. There are others, old men with scars, kitchen girls no older than 15, a boy with one arm, each one waiting their turn, some trembling, some smiling, all silent. The ceremony is simple, but the meaning is not. You stand before a magistrate, a Roman citizen, a praetor or consul, someone with the power to reshape your life with a gesture. The master places his hand on your head. That's the manumissio vindicta, a formal declaration that you are no longer property, but a person. He says the words, "I free this man." And just like that, the chains are off. Not physically. You haven't worn those in years, but in law, in name, in Rome. But don't get too comfortable. You're free, yes, but not equal. Not really. You're now a Libertus, a freedman, a citizen of Rome, but second class. You can't run for office. You can't join the Senate. Your children might, someday, if they're lucky. But you've still got work to do. Because freedom comes with a price, and that price is loyalty. Your former master is now your patronus. You're his client. You owe him respect, labor, and presence. You rise early to greet him in the morning, to walk in his shadow, to attend his banquets if called. It's not slavery, but it isn't independence either. Still, there are perks. You can marry now, legally. You can own property. You can start a business, open a shop, sell olive oil or dice or tunics or anything your bruised hands remember. You can have a family and give them your name, whatever name your master gave you. Some freedmen get rich, richer than their old masters even. It happens. Not often, but enough to keep the hope alive in every slave's heart. They build tombs with carved inscriptions. Once a slave, now a citizen. It matters. It's a declaration to the world and to the gods. Others disappear into the corners of the city, blending in with the poor, the sick, the forgotten. Their freedom is real, but it doesn't feed them. They trade one kind of hunger for another. You don't know what your path will be. Not yet. But that night, as you walk home alone for the first time in years, the streets feel different. No guards barking orders. No master waiting in the atrium. Just you, and the taste of night air, and the simple knowledge that if you turn left instead of right, no one will stop you. You're free, and tomorrow, the world begins again. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.